Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Cold Red podcast. I'm Ray Carr. I'm a former criminal profile coordinator with the Philadelphia FBI, and I was responsible for profiling dozens of serial crimes over my career and capturing the Friday night bank robber after 30 years on the run. And with me, as always, is Fitz.
Hey, James R. Fitzgerald here, Fitz for short. I'm a former Ben Salem Police Detective Sergeant at suburban Philly. Joined the FBI in 1987, went to New York City for 7 years, transferred to Quantico as a supervisory special agent and a criminal profiler, later a forensic linguist, helped catch the Unabomber, DC Sniper, and a few other cases over the years.
We have a special guest tonight, but before we get there, Fitz?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking with Professor Ashlyn Kuersten. But I just want to bring all of us into a very interesting criminal matter that occurred over the last few days, and that is the kidnapping in upstate New York of 9-year-old Charlotte Senna. And let me say up front, and Ray, I know you know this, a lot of bad things happen to little kids, and they do get abducted, usually for sexual assault type reasons. Less and less as time goes on, but they still happen. But the rarest of the rare is an actual kidnapping for profit. And although all the facts aren't in on this case yet, and I'm not sure how serious this guy really was, but that seems to be the potential motivation for this case. And I worked the John Benet Ramsey case, and I don't discuss the details anymore, but that was made to look like a for-profit ransom type kidnapping, but of course it wasn't. And, this Lindbergh baby was kidnapped in the 30s. Frank Sinatra Jr. was kidnapped in the 60s. He was an adult then. And there's been a handful of others, but this is a rarity. So I'll throw it to you, Ray. Any initial observations over,
here's
again, how quickly the police handled this and got her out seemingly unscathed? But go ahead.
Well, here's the thing, you say it's a rarity. And stranger abductions are very rare. Now, I had a chance to take a look at some things, and they said usually over the last 10 years, or since 2010, the average number of stranger abductions in the United States per year was about 325 juveniles under the age of 17. Now, when you say 325, that's not that many compared to the thousands of juveniles that are reported missing to the FBI and to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children every year. Now, 95% or more of those really are actually runaways. But in this case, this young girl kind of takes another ride around the block, as you might say, or through the park where she's staying, and she disappears. So it tells me that he was an opportunist and he was waiting for the ability to make this happen, which he did. But here's the thing, Jim, and how they actually caught Ross is the fact that early in the morning, about 4 a.m., he goes by the residence of this young girl and puts a ransom note in their mailbox. Parents turn that ransom note over to the police. They run it for fingerprints, and voila, his fingerprint comes up. So we look at this individual and we say, from our perspective, at least I look, not a very organized individual, very disorganized. This is not something he does routinely. This is probably something just kind of thing. I need some money. And I don't know much about his background other than there was a couple criminal charges, mostly misdemeanors. One DUI in 1999, another harassment, which could be either physically touching or over the phone or just saying something to someone. But, the thing here is that when there is a stranger abduction, what's even more rare is that the child is found alive. And I am so thankful that this young girl was found alive. I prayed and prayed that this young girl was going to be found alive, and my prayers were answered. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people out there that prayed as well. So I'm so
imagine how those parents must have felt. I just can't imagine what the parents must feel going through.
Think of that.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine.
I agree.
Yeah, and we didn't get into your intro yet. We'll get more into that, but Western Michigan University professor Ashlyn Kuersten, any observations just on this case? I know in 5 or 10 years, if this happened in Michigan, it could have been your group working this case, but any upfront observations on your part about this?
Yeah, alone? I was talking to Ray earlier. We're actually working on a case, 13-year-old that went missing, and her body was found, but not for a year after the abduction had happened. And so it's hard to get evidence on cases like this, right? The body had been in an exposed area in water, so there wasn't as much evidence. So the trick is, I think, finding them as soon as possible. You got to really give law enforcement a pat on the back for how quickly they called out everybody. It's very impressive that they were able to find her.
And my colleagues in the behavioral unit, the FBI, years ago did a study, and if a child abduction, and again, this was a kidnapping for profit, the rarest of the rare, but even a regular, I hate to even use that term, air quotes if you're only listening here, child abduction, there's a formula, like if it goes past so many hours, the odds are of safely finding the missing child is goes down exponentially in that regard. Although there have been some strange cases lately of, maybe a few years, 5 years, 10 years later, here's this child still alive. And I know it has a lot of parents, keeping hope in that regard. And I'll tell you, I'll just end up my portion with this is the most difficult interview, I think, in my 31 years in law enforcement. And I wrote about this in my third book, A Journey to the Center of the Mind, book 3, had to do with a serial killer case we were looking into. And we thought this guy kidnapped someone, a young boy named Doug Legg, in the early 1970s in New York State, not too far as the crow flies from where this current kidnapping occurred. And we thought 20 years later, we had some information of of who may have abducted this boy, possibly. And we sat down and talked with those parents. And it was the most difficult interview because they had no closure in life. Their son just disappeared from a family outing in a New York State park, and they never saw him again. And in the book, there's we gave them closure, even in sort of a indirect sort of way in that regard. But again, parents who go, I can't imagine what the parents must have gone through around Saratoga Springs, New York, little Charlotte's parents over the last few days. But they got the best news of all, and she is recovered and seemingly in one piece, and hopefully through all the medical exams, she will grow up to have a very, fruitful life.
Yes, thankfully.
Well, why don't we move on? Ashlyn Kuersten is a phenomenal educator. I mean, what she's doing, in my estimation, is groundbreaking, and so groundbreaking that's how we met. I reached out to Ashlyn and I said, Dr. Kuersten, and I reached out to her and I said, I want to do what you're doing. I want to bring what you're doing to my university, where I'm now working, which is Wilmington University. I want to bring that program here. And back in July, Ashlyn came out to Wilmington University and kind of took time to sit down and talk to us about what they do at Western Michigan. So I don't want to talk too much about you, Dr. Kuersten, but why don't you give us a little bit about your background? And one of the greatest things before you go, don't forget to tell us about Alaska.
So are you asking me where I came from? How did I come up with this?
Where'd you come from? Yeah.
So I grew up in rural Alaska, and my parents had moved up there from Western Colorado back, in the 60s to get away from it all. And they did. They got away from it all. And I ended up moving to the States in my early 20s to go to college. And it was just kind of a fluke that I ended up being able to go to college. I worked for a law firm in Anchorage as a receptionist, and it was a husband and wife team. And they took me aside. I think I was 20. And they said, "You're a smart kid. You need to get out of here. This is a rough place." The ratio of men to women was like 500 to 1. And lots of kids from high school were getting themselves in trouble. And they said, "Go anywhere you want, anywhere you can get in the United States. We'll pay for a semester." And so I just came down like a fluke. I'm really adventurous, I guess. I'm just going to do it for a semester, and then I'll go home and get my receptionist job back. And then, I loved it. And here it is, like 30 years later, and I'm still in college in a different kind of format. I'm like, 3.0 college, but I'm still in college doing the exact same thing I moved to the States 30 years ago to do. And so I got my degrees largely in the South. And it's University of South Carolina, I picked up my PhD, and then landed in Michigan, Western Michigan University. And I've been here ever since. I teach criminal law. I'm actually a scholar of constitutional law, but I'm fascinated by criminal law. And I guess that's kind of how I got into this business that I'm in now.
So you went by that quickly, but just to interject here, you have a PhD and a JD.
Yes, I have a master's degree and a bachelor's degree, and I think I have an associate's degree. Yeah, I really love going to school. It's still, to this day, it's just the most fascinating thing to me. It really is. I'm utterly mystified that I get to do this for a living. You walk into a classroom and you get to sit around and talk about books and ideas with other people who have read similar books and have similar ideas. And the whole goal is to gain knowledge and hopefully make our world a better place while we're doing it. If we understand our world, people will come up with ideas that will make our world a better place. So it feels like a kind of a gift to me that I get to go in and talk smart things with smart students, because I think my students are brilliant. I think we don't give college students enough credit. I think if you just stand back, give them the right encouragement and stand back, you can be it's utterly unbelievable what they're capable of doing at such a young age.
I agree.
Yeah. So
Ash, how did you come up with this idea? Tell us how this thing kind of morphed itself.
I know. Every time I get on some national media show, they always ask this, and I wish I had like some really like a terribly sexy story, but it really is pretty simple. Like we were just talking about the young girl that was abducted. I've been teaching criminal law my entire career. And of course, we talk about these cases, and it always just left this bad taste in my mouth that, textbooks talk about, bad law enforcement, bad policies, and bad defendants, right? We never, though, talk about these two things that just always fascinated me. One is how heartbreaking it is to be a victim or a family member of a victim of a violent crime. They like you were mentioning, Fitz, they don't get any closure, especially if it's an abduction. Oftentimes, even if it's a murder, they have so many questions that don't get answered. And when you watch the number of cold cases in the United States, cold homicide and missing person cases go up, that there's something wrong here. I kept going, I'd see European countries, Germany, for example, has one of the lowest cold cases in the world. Why are ours going up? The other thing I think that we don't cover is in our classes, in our textbooks, is what does good law enforcement look like, right? It's really easy to talk about, the Floyd case, for example, and what law enforcement did wrong. But I just felt like with all of my criminal law students, they all want to go into law enforcement of some sort. They deserve to know what good law enforcement looks like. Like, let's talk to the people who conduct good investigations, who are open to these new scientific methods that come along, think DNA or fingerprint analysis, the advancements or whatnot. So I started inviting a uh, uh, detective from the Michigan State Police in to talk to my classes. I'd gotten several grants over the years to investigate parts of criminal law. So I was kind of thinking of a grant project or a long-term academic project. But I had this friend of mine, Chuck Christensen, come in, and he was talking to students about actual cases he had worked on, largely cold murder cases and missing person cases, and how they conducted interviews and what's the difference between an interrogation and an interview, and the things that go wrong, and what does a good search warrant look like instead of just studying the bad search warrants. And literally we were kind of commiserating about our jobs. It was a cold December day in Michigan, and he was complaining that they have so many cold cases here in Michigan, and they just don't have the staffing to investigate these cases. And several of them, if they just had more resources, they had more people. It's just amazing. We could wipe these cold cases off the books. And said, oh yeah, I said, we all have challenges in our careers that just tear at us. And I said, mine is that I'm always talking constitutional law to these students who are going to be law enforcement tomorrow, and prosecutors and whatnot. But I always really struggle with giving them real world research projects. Like, it's one thing for me to stand up there and say, blah, 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 let's talk about exceptions to search warrants. It's a whole other thing if I can give them a real world example. And so anyway, I went home for the Christmas break, and I was actually riding my horse and just kind of thinking about this kind of conundrum. We all have these challenges in life. And I literally thought, wow, I wonder if law enforcement would let me in. I wonder if they would let a bunch of college students take a crack at researching these cases. I know these students, they are good, they're good people, they're good students. And my gosh, wouldn't law enforcement want that? Like a really well-educated new crop of future law enforcement, that they could actually work with. So I came up with this idea, like how, and it really was that simple. Like, can you give me one case? Just humor me for a minute. Can you give me one case, and let me take 4 students and look at this case. And we'd meet with the detective who was assigned to the case every week. The students started doing research projects for the detectives. The students then started getting a little more confident that they knew this case really well. It was a big case, thousands of pages. So then they started, first it was, very hesitantly, but coming to me and saying, hey, what do you think Detective Moore would think if we gave him this suggestion of somebody to interview? And so then it started becoming like a give and take. The detectives were saying things like, I can't believe how well these students know this case. It's thousands of pages, and they have, timelines drawn out, and they have lists of people of interest, and they've done all this work. And I come in here and they're reminding me of things I'd forgotten that's back on, page 2000. I'm up to page 4000, and so it became really useful. And obviously, they sent a rape kit to a genetic lab, and they got a positive hit on someone, and the students were able to help them know about the person of interest. And I'm probably more astonished than anybody else, literally in America, that we've been successful. That's not why I did this. I was hoping that, we would make strides in helping the detectives, to know more about the case, but I didn't really think that we'd be involved in solving a case. And that was exciting. The national news was incredible, all the attention. And then we solved another one with Michigan State Police. It's just been a whirlwind in the past year.
I have a question for you. And over the last probably 3-4 years,
Mm-hmm.
the media has just butchered law enforcement. There's nothing good that's said about law enforcement. Law enforcement is is horrible in every facet. And you said that, but did you notice a decrease in your students wanting to study criminal justice? Did this program help change their mind about law enforcement? Or was, when they came into your program, most of the kids that come into our program look at law enforcement as it's not the old law enforcement. These guys are not good. They're crooks. They're bad. The whole 9 yards. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's been really alarming to see the decline in our regard for law enforcement. I've always told my students that at their stage in the game, they're in their early 20s or so, they really have kind of two paths, and they need to decide pretty early on in life which one you're going to go after. The one path is for financial gain, right? You're an entrepreneur. You are going to pursue something that's going to benefit you financially. Hopefully, you'll turn that around and make the world a better place, but that's profit. The other pathway, though, which I think we all have an obligation to at least consider this as a career, is as a public servant. And I think law enforcement is the perfect example of people who literally give their lives up to make our world a better place. And I think what's happened over the past 5 years is a lot of media attention about, justifiably, I think, there are bad police officers out there. There are bad professors out there, of course, but it's gotten a lot of media attention. And what I've found is my students often come into the program wanting to research cold cases, maybe because they think they can add something to making our world a little bit a better place. But then pretty quickly, once they come in contact with these detectives, these true public servants in our world, they quickly change their mind. Law enforcement isn't all bad. These are some incredible men and women who have really literally put their lives on the line to try to make our world a better place. And it changes the student's perspective. You can almost see the light bulb come on. Like, wow, this is a hero in my own time. I'm sitting here and talking to him or her. And it gives them the courage, I think, to choose public service as a career path. And really, our world is better for having more public servants rather than less public servants. And I hope that this program, assists in that. We've seen a huge increase with the state police and my program in the number of students who are pursuing state police positions, either as recruits or in the civilian world. And I think it's because they're meeting people from the state police and other police agencies who are showing them what that could look like.
Ashlyn, this is so refreshing to hear your perspective here in this. I don't think that's the majority of academia, and we can perhaps address that a little bit later in this conversation. But what I like to tell people when I've done it on Cold Red and other forums is that just to put numbers out there, and certainly over the last few years, a uniform police in the U.S. have approximately 900,000 interactions per day with members of the public. Car accidents, real alarms, fake alarms, cat in a tree, of course, armed robbery, homicide, rape, all little things like that, cars broken down. 900,000, it could be more on certain weekends, maybe less on other weekdays, but 900,000 or so on the average of police interactions on a daily basis. And how many really bad stories have we heard in the last 5 or 10 years that even once all the publicity dies down, okay, actually the police officer really didn't do anything wrong here, or it was just an unbelievable situation where, a perfect or imperfect storm where everything went wrong. So statistically speaking, law enforcement officers are doing a great job out there. And Ray and I, and it sounds like you actually were the first ones to call them out. I've arrested them. Ray has in the past, or at least involved ourselves indirectly in arresting bad cops and FBI agents for that matter. And they deserve to be arrested. Of course, due process, go through the court system. But the vast majority are doing great work. But the media somehow have an interest right now in painting a different picture. And we don't want to go here for our whole conversation tonight, but I just find it refreshing to hear some of the work you're doing and bringing this positive outlook to your students. And I'm not sure if there's some other professors at Western Michigan. You don't have to get into the specifics, but they may look at things in a different way. I've talked to prosecutors when they want experts to testify and they go to academia for whatever the skill set may be. A lot of them saying, "Oh, you're law enforcement." No, I don't work with you. I only work with the defense. Really? And, but again, we're getting off subject here a little bit, although they're not that far. So again, kudos to you for doing what you're doing.
Let me ring it back around. Here's another question for you, Ash. You're coming to me. I'm a police officer that works cold cases. And you say, I have a bunch of kids that I think might be able to help you go through your case. And I'm like, I don't think so. I'm not going to let a bunch of kids look at information that is sensitive and that could wind up out on Facebook or Instagram, these pictures or this or that. I'm skeptical. How did you overcome that? I'm sure that you came up to that, but how did you overcome that?
Well, yeah, the skepticism took me about 5 years to develop an encrypted computer system and other measures to reassure state police here. Now that I've gotten so much media attention, I'm traveling all over the country and advising other schools like Wilmington University of how to set up similar programs. So I oftentimes get that pushback from other states that are telling schools or schools that are telling the state police, no, that this is a crazy idea. I think honestly, it just comes down to I have to trust these students, and I'm really, really honest with them. They go through quite a rigmarole to get into my program, obviously, but I literally sit down with each of them and I say, this is a pilot program for not only the rest of the country, but the rest of the world. Everybody's watching. Yeah. My whole career could be shot down because of what you potentially could release on social media. I need to be able to trust you. It's never going to show up on social media. If you see a security potential breach within my program, I need you to tell me about it so I can fix it. But you are on my team. And I think people don't give college students enough credit. They take to this. It's the first time in their life, I think, for most of them that somebody has actually said, "I believe in you." And I have told the state police at the very beginning, I stake my reputation on this. I watched every single move that these students make. We make sure that, there are certain rules that are covered. The students have to go through a background check and I also have had Detective Christensen come in and talk to my students that if they're in this program and they do make a breach, that probably not going to get another job in law enforcement ever again, right? They're applying for federal law enforcement in different states. Yeah, I'm not going to give them a recommendation. So, but I want to emphasize, though, the majority of what I'm doing is not a stick. It's more a carrot. It's saying, I need to be able to trust you. And if you want to be in law enforcement, this is what it's going to take. Sometimes it's like, I think it's impossible. I can't believe that these kids didn't let me down. We had one case where we knew who the bad guy was. It was right at the very tail end of the pandemic. And he was not charged for almost a year because the courts were so backed up. There was a speedy trial concern about this guy. So they sat on it. They kept an eye on him, but they sat on. Well, my students had to sit on this explosive information that they had, that we had actually helped MSP solve a murder case. And people would come in and say, well, too bad you guys haven't been successful, but at least you got the experience of working. And the students would have to say, yes, we don't have a person yet. You know, they had to keep this secret, and it was very difficult. But I think it's good. That's education, right? Education doesn't just have to come out of a book. Sometimes the most important things that we learn come from learning from someone's example. And I have a big sign in the front area of my research lab, and it says, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one's watching. And I do try to emphasize that with the students, that even if I'm not here, I'm not looking over your shoulder, you have to make a decision about what kind of a human being you're going to be. And I take my role as making the world a better place very seriously, and I hope they do. I think our world would be better if everybody did something incredible for the world, you know, on a regular basis. And I think you lead by example. So I have never had a security breach. Now, I've had close calls. I just recently, I never thought of this possibility. I had one of the students in my program. She called me in a panic one night, and she was on Facebook Marketplace buying, no kidding, a vacuum for her new apartment at the beginning of the semester. And she had interacted with this guy, you know, for the last few days. And then it all of a sudden dawned on her that this was a witness in the case that she had been working with MSP on. And oh my gosh, what do I do? She did exactly the right thing. I was so proud of her that she immediately realized what was happening. She ghosted the guy, then immediately called me to say, oh my gosh, did I do that? You know, what should I do next? So questions come up, and, you know, these students, law enforcement is correct to be, you know, curious about how this is going to work out. But as one of the detectives told me, Larry Rothman, he told me this at the very beginning of this work. He said, you know, if states don't do anything about cold cases, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to learn anything. The cases aren't going to get solved. So do nothing and get nothing. Or you can do something, and maybe you can find some closure for some of these poor victim family members. And that's really what drives me. And I think I have the state police here on my side. You know, we haven't had a security breach yet. So it works. It does. That's all I can say to other states.
Students are so lucky. The students
as a follow-up here, do you does the university or the Michigan State Police have the students sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements?
Oh yeah,
anything like
it's
that,
a really
just to
extensive,
make it quasi-legal?
Yes, we are very extensive in how we protect the students as well. So the students are behind an encrypted computer system, so they don't have access to, you know, emailing anything. They don't email any material. We have to be there in my research lab to work on these cases. So there's nothing that's written, or no text messages, no emails. And they know they're given a 2-day training period where I let them know they can't even talk to my colleagues in the hallway about a case that they're working on, not their parents, not their roommate, nobody. They sign a confidentiality agreement with me, and then a non-disclosure with the Michigan State Police. They also go through lean training, level 1 lean training, and some other training that MSP requires them to do. We just got some really good news this week. I was telling Ray, most of the kids that are the students that are at my university are, first generation college students. So in other words, most of them have part-time jobs, and it makes it difficult for them to put a lot of energy into something like this, which is bigger than a class, right? It almost becomes like an obsession when you get into, I'm sure you guys know this very well. The Michigan State Police has turned all of my cold case students into either student cadets or student interns, and they are getting paid for their work with me, which allows them to focus their energy on, their cold case that they're working on. And then for 4 hours of every week, they can go to a post or a DNA lab, crime lab, to learn the ropes from, the experts that they want to emulate. So it's really a game changer because it allows us to do a lot more work for the state police without the kids leaving to, go deliver pizzas or, something along those lines. It changes everything.
It's a true win-win for everyone. My last question in this category, do the state police ask the family of the victims, maybe from 5 years ago or 35 years ago is one of the cases you help solve. Do they go to the family and say, would you mind if we bring in the Western Michigan students? I'm just curious how that part works.
Yes, they do. On many of the cases, it just depends on the case, I guess I would say.
Sure.
But yeah, we actually have very close working relationships with several of the victims' family members. They come in to meet the students. It oftentimes gives them a lot of closure to know that even if their mom isn't found, that we overturned every stone. And they were a group of highly dedicated, invested people in their loved one's case that looked at everything that they could. And so it helps the victim's family members quite a bit. I think the other win too is that, law enforcement gets this group of new recruits. I mean, in many states, recruitment is way down because kind of circling back to Fitz's original question, there's a lot of kind of negativity about law enforcement. And in many states, the recruitment is just way down. I think this is going to help that a little bit. You have students who are really vested in a law enforcement career when they spend, a semester or 2 semesters doing this kind of work. And now they're going to be going into the posts and the labs to get a good feel for what that kind of work looks like. So I hope we're going to see higher recruitment levels.
Ashley, and I know Jim knows this, and I know you know this too. There's some cases that no matter what you do, how you look at it, how you slice it, they're never going to be solved. There's not enough information that would help or lead for something to be solved, or there's the solvability of that case is just not there. With that said, is there a criteria that you focus on when you choose cases? And I know in the very beginning, you'll take whatever they give you, but you want your students to have success. So you want something to have a little bit of solvability with it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One hard thing about doing a program like this when you're the first is that the only lesson you get are you learn from your mistakes. You learn from the things that didn't work. We were really, I don't choose the cases. I never have. I try not to have a voice in that. I think that is the domain of law enforcement. There's a million different decisions that go into which cases the state police decides are most important, most worthy, the ones that have the most information. So for the most part, I don't have a voice in which cases we choose. But that being said, I do think there are cases that we have worked on where there, like you said, there's just not enough evidence. There's one case we were working on. It's a very tight-knit community where this young man was killed, and nobody wants to talk to law enforcement. They have a lot of distrust for law enforcement. And there's just no movement in the community to fess up. Somebody knows what's happened, but I think those cases also could be considered a win, because here's the thing. I had on that case 8 students working each 120 hours per semester for 2 semesters. That's thousands of hours of work on this case. The case has been examined, organized. That's one of the biggest things that the students do. You too would know this. When you have a case file that consists of like 90 banker boxes of material, and the case has been opened 4 or 5 times over the decades, the poor detectives, they don't even know what they don't know. They don't even know what's in this case file, right? There's just so much. So I think even when there's like, we don't have a win on a case and they end up closing it because there was no evidence, there was nothing. I think future detectives can look back at that case and say, they put thousands of hours into this case and they didn't find anything. And the detectives were, truly dedicated to this case for a year or 2 years or whatever the state police ends up classifying it as. I think future law enforcement can say it's probably just not a case we're going to solve. Right. Other cases, though, they looked unsolvable, especially older cases. And in the course of us organizing it, it's a really elaborate thing how I've developed their organization of these case files. You'd be surprised what these students find. I mean, they have time in a way that us professionals don't, to sit down and look at all of the missing person, cases in the state of New York or the state of Michigan or whatever for literally hundreds of hours. They have time to do elaborate timelines that, there's no way as a professional, you're always being pulled in 15 different directions. They're not. They are doing this case. This is the most exciting thing that's happened in their life. And it's what they want to do as a career. So they want to impress me. They want to impress the detectives. I mean, there are some nights in my research lab, I literally have to kick those students out of there. Like, come on, you guys have been here for like hours. It's time to go home. I'm not buying any more pizza. You need to go home and get some rest. But like, what is that worth to a detective who has split between, 5 different cases, right? They know that these students are on it. And so I think it's beneficial even if we don't get an arrest. I do. I think that future generations of law enforcement are going to look back on the cases we worked and say, wow, when we close out a case, we have a very elaborate thing that we do with PowerPoint presentations so that some future law enforcement official can go and look through that case 10 years later and say, here's all the things that we did. Here's all the stones that we turned over, on the basis of what the detective wanted us to do. Of course, we don't do it just without asking someone. But if anyone wanted to know if there was anything left to research, we try to answer that question.
Ashlyn, in one of your media interviews, excuse me, Ray, you used the term force multiplier. And that's exactly what you offer these law enforcement agencies in these types of cases. You obviously increase the person power, 5-fold, 10-fold, depending on each individual case, how many students assigned to it, and the number of hours. The one case involving Roxanne Wood, did I read it right? 1,200 hours your students put in over 8 months. Now, that's besides what the investigators are doing, of course, when they're responding to some of the leads and investigative strategies they're picking up. So, yeah, that force multiplier is an excellent term. It's a military law enforcement term, but it certainly applies to your academic group.
Over the last two years, I think we've produced 20,000 hours of student labor. And so, the detectives, we just had a meeting yesterday and the 3 detectives, walked in and the students do a presentation here. This is what you asked us to do last time. This is all the people that were living in this neighborhood in, 2010. And this person did not serve in the military, even though he told you he did. And, here's all the research that you had us do. kind of what's next. And so the detectives are just throwing out these ideas. Well, what about, could we get a list of all the DNA that's been taken? Could we get a mapping of all of the people that were interviewed and what they said, a mapping with where this woman had disappeared from? I think it's an incredible resource for the detectives. And that's the beautiful thing. I keep trying to tell other states this. It's a win-win. I mean, right? I'm in a public university. I'm helping public servants to do their job, to give answers to victim family members. I mean, we're all going to win from this, right? And we end up with a better numbers in the people that are open to careers in law enforcement. I just think everybody wins. The students win, the police officers win, the victim family members win. And it's because we're able to do that kind of work, in a way that, how that is. For you guys have written books before. You get going on a book and oh man, I could go off on this bunny trail, but I just do not have time. I've got deadlines, right? And it's not like that with these students. I mean, they would work till the ends of the earth for these detectives. They feel vested, in this job. It's like they're on a journey to make the world a better place.
Would part of what they do, would they ever be authorized to go to say a crime scene? And I mean, it may be 10 or 30 years later, but would either with permission, the stipulation of the state police, perhaps with you, and just so they could walk around the crime scene and get some ideas? Is that part of what they would do,
yes,
besides just looking at old files?
Exactly. We do that on every single case that we work on. There's actually been a couple of circumstances on older cases where the detectives are going to interview someone and they will allow the students to sit either behind the glass for the interview to listen to it, or at least hear the recording. We work with
That's amazing.
audio visual on a regular basis. And what's cool too is that these detectives that come in, I mean, they're the best, right? That's why they're detectives working on cases like this. And they're so, I don't know how else to say it other than they're like such groovy people. They come in and they're willing to sit through an entire a video interview of some guy and stop the video, in odd places and say, "You see, look what I'm about to do here. See, I'm leading him down this bunny trail, and you see how I'm doing that. Let's back up for a second so you can see that over again." I mean, what is the value of that? Imagine, 20 years from now, my students are going to be, detectives themselves. So what are they gaining from this? I mean, I think it'll be phenomenal to see how much they learn from these seasoned detectives.
Ashlyn, for the purpose of our audience, you mentioned one thing, banker boxes. And a lot of people go, what is a banker box? But if you could talk about from soup to nuts, when you get a case, what's the first thing your students do, and kind of walk us through the progression of how things proceed when you do this, and just give our audience a taste of it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, so ideally they come in with notebooks that have tabs on them and everything looks like a book, but it never works that way. What really happens is they come in with these banker boxes. What is a banker box? 3 feet long. And it is an accumulation of everything in the case that's happened over the last 20 years or 30 years. Some of it is like a fingerprint analysis. Some of it is, old phone records, maps. There's just so much in there.
How many boxes might you see in a case?
70
boxes? 70?
70,
wow.
90. And oftentimes, they'll bring all these boxes in and, they don't even know what's in there. I just got assigned this case, the detective will say. I kind of know a little bit about the case, but where do I start? I mean, especially if it's a case that's happened since social media, since 2010. because now you have all of these Facebook messages and postings on Facebook and Insta and all of this. So it's just thousands and thousands of pages. So what the students do is just literally take a huge conference room, and they start putting things into piles that make sense. This is everything about the crime scene. This is everything about the witnesses. This is everything about labs that came back, etc. And then we bring the detectives in to say, what do you think about this? Like, look at all this stuff here. And what do we do? Like, we get things, especially if it's a really old case. It's really interesting. The students will be like, what is this? Like, it's a VHS tape. Like, they're like, oh my gosh, what? Or like voicemail, or like remember answering machines. Like, really? You shared an answering machine with like everybody in your house? Like, or onion skin paper, carbon paper. You can't read it, right? Because it's been copied so many times. So the students will transcribe it into a Word document. It's not official, but it will help the detectives. So we organize it like this. Then the students begin scanning it into, it's a program that I use. It turns everything in the file into ocular recognition. So even like a sticky note like this, the handwriting turns into something that can be searched by the detectives. That oftentimes is incredibly helpful for them. So we literally turn 70 banker boxes into a massive PDF that then we put on the detective's laptop or tablet or whatever. So while they're in the field, they can do a quick search on a person's name or a license plate, an address, whatever it is that they're looking for. And then from that point forward, when the detectives come in with other information, let's say lab reports that come back because DNA technology has changed. We're working with the FBI on one case from the Detroit field office. They had a forensic analyst that did some work on a case. So that material then gets plugged into these PDFs so that the detectives always have all of the information. Sometimes they ask us to further help the organization if it's a large case. Like they'll have us do an index of all of the people that are and how they're connected with one another. And so the students are happy to do that. Sometimes we'll have 8,000 people that were mentioned in a file. It's nice for the detective just to be able to quickly look and see who those people were. Wow. Yeah, so it's very dynamic, and it really depends on what the case is and what the detectives want us to do. Some detectives are much more advanced with technology, and other detectives are completely dependent upon the college students. Just here's my laptop, make that PDF work on my laptop. And of course, college students are perfect for that. It makes them feel like they actually know more than detectives do on something, which of course they do because they know computers.
When you look at the cases that you have, how many cases have you worked since the inception of your program? And how many of those cases have you been part of that have been solved?
So there's a few of them that I can't discuss yet, but we have worked on 19 cases so far. And what's public is we've helped the police. It's important to mention that we're simply assisting the police, and it's not like the college students are solving the case, of course. But we have helped the police in solving 2 that are public so far. And I think we're going to have a few more here in the next couple of months to talk about. It's been a really it's been the most meaningful thing that I've done in my career. I do think that this is truly going to make the world a better place. And a lot of people have asked me why I don't, kind of trademark this, make it my. And it's because I think all states need to have this. I think that we all benefit, having a well-educated, enthusiastic next generation of law enforcement is so incredibly important for the future of our country. I just don't think we can go wrong with having this everywhere. And so I want to make myself available anytime somebody like Ray comes a calling. It's amazing the cool people I've met in this work, people that also just want to make our world a little bit better. And this is one way to do it.
Well, Stan, here's a double-edged question.
Okay.
Since you have begun this program, what's the best thing that's happened to you and this program since you began?
Oh, that's easy. That's easy. There's two things and they're tied. The greatest thing is the one of the cases that we helped MSP to solve, to actually talk to the victims' family members, to hear the relief, to hear that closure that Fitz talked about on another case. Oh my gosh, that makes it all worthwhile. The late nights and the other thing is when the students leave, they're heartbroken to leave the cold case program. They call themselves the Scooby-Doo crew, like the old comic, the Scooby-Doo crew. But then they call me and they say, Dr. K, I just got offered a job with the FBI. I just got offered a job with the State Department. I just got offered a job with the Indiana State Police. That is just so cool. That's like coming full circle, right? These kids learned how to be an adult, how to be a good investigator from the best. And now they're going out into the world. I just think that's so amazing. So it's an interesting
delineation here about what your program allows these students to do, as opposed to lots of people who are watching podcasts who break down some kind of a case or even a documentary like Making of a Murder, which I'm watching now, Convicting a Murder. And boy, there's a lot of stuff that first alleged documentary, I'll be generous in calling it that, failed to portray. And there's these people that I'm watching this, and they are rabid about how they're convinced this person didn't commit the crime, someone else did, whatever, but they are on the outside. And Ray and I are always very careful. We just talked about this kidnapping case. I've talked about the Idaho killers back in November of last year. And I'm always careful to say, look, all I have is the media reports to go on. But based on my experience and trying to synthesize everything out there, here's, some opinions of mine, and even just talking earlier here. So the difference, though, is your kids aren't watching or listening to a podcast with people with no experience in the world of law enforcement or criminal investigations.
That's right.
They are actually walking the walk right now. And they really can't talk the talk because they have restrictions. And someday, perhaps they can when the case is resolved. So this makes all the difference in the world. And I instead of some of these students and other people just getting focused on these one-sided podcasts, which Cold Red is not that. We're about the victims, and we will do as much to tell both sides of the story as possible. But I like what you're doing, and I really hope this spreads like wildfire to other private universities, state universities, and let's get young people engaged. There are so many meaningless, rudderless, I won't say they're meaningless, but rudderless young people out there who just don't know where to go. They watch one or two media sites and think this about whatever politics, this about law enforcement, but to get in the middle of something, to be allowed to accept this adult responsibility that you give them after some vetting, which there should be, and the state police do their vetting too. I think this is just I said earlier, win-win, but everyone around the full circle, from the victim's family to the police to the students themselves to Western Michigan University, all benefit from this. And let's hope this does spread nationwide. And if people really want to get involved in cold cases, get involved in a program like yours and put some of these third and fourth tier podcasts and documentaries aside. Get the facts. Don't worry about someone else's interpretation from an entertainment venue. So again, thanks for coming up with this idea.
A detective said something to me at the very beginning of my work on these cold cases. He said, don't decide who did it before you know who did it. just don't go there. And that's part of the training of these students. You can't choose favorites. Your job is to gather the evidence. It's a perfect research project, right? It's perfect.
Absolutely. Love it. I love it. Well, here's the thing, and nobody knows this, but I know it because Ashlyn's told me. But Ashlyn, you got to tell our audience, and you got to tell Jim, how this thing has absolutely blown up at your university. People need to know this. You got to tell them.
Okay. I am just this quiet little Alaska girl who works at a Midwestern university and, very quiet life teaching constitutional law and living on my farm. This has been unbelievable. It really is like a real life Scooby-Doo cartoon script, except for it's like real people.
There's no talking dog, I assume.
Talking dog. There's that.
The next podcast, we're getting the talking dog on here. All right,
that would be good.
Jim's going to wear a Scooby-Doo outfit.
It's such a good story. I mean, it's got, we win. Everybody wins. But, the Today Show has been here and 48 Hours and, the local media and the regional media. And it has just been a whirlwind. Learning, I didn't even know we were on a TV commercial, that got recorded over the summer. Like, I didn't even know that you needed 30 people to record a commercial. I didn't know that. It's been this, crazy world. I didn't think I'd ever end up, on TV talking about criminal law, in people's living room. It's crazy. I come from this really, really small town in Alaska that no one's ever heard of before. And people call my mother and say, "Oh my gosh, I just saw your kid on, 48 Hours or on, it's crazy. The attention. But I think we need to do this. We need to have some happy things that go on in our society and things that make our world a better place. And I think these college students are the perfect ones to do that. And thank goodness for all these good detectives that are helping them to learn what they should. It's been very positive.
What about the number of students, Ash, that have,
oh my gosh,
that have
it's
grown
crazy.
Exponentially?
It's crazy. We did an open house, an informational open house, a couple of weeks ago because we were getting ready to do the applications for next year. And I think, we had hundreds, a couple hundred people that just showed up, for just to find out more information about it. I have days where I'll get 500 emails in the course of a day. About, what we're doing, can you come in and talk, or how do I do this? I'm at a community college in New Mexico. I mean, could a small school like mine make something like this happen? Or can we come in and see your center and look at what does an encrypted computer system look like? I have to reassure the higher ups at my state police agency that this could work. And, and with that comes, also tension. There's tension at the university. Police are not particularly popular, among members of the public. And, certainly a university department, is a microcosm of society. So I do get a lot of pushback, at times for, working so closely with the police. I was talking to our public safety office yesterday, and he told me that they get calls a lot of reports that there are armed people in the elevator and in the hallway that goes to, of course, we have police officers constantly in my lab. You think that the students would feel safe having armed people in the hallways, but they're not always feeling so safe. So that's been the downside of all of this attention is, I spend a lot of time defending what I'm doing, but I think if you know what you're doing is the right thing to do, you just kind of have to put cotton in your ears and just ignore the naysayers, just
actually, is there one or more professors at Western Michigan also working on an innocence project?
No, I worked on one prior, but nobody else here is. I do have colleagues who I call program consultants that have been invaluable to the state police. We have a geophysicist who has like a state-of-the-art ground penetrating radar that she uses with a drone and pulling it over the ground. And she has been just incredibly valuable with these missing person cases. I also have an amazing university librarian. Everyone forgets about the power of librarians. You know, everything in our world now, well, I don't know about everything, but pretty much everything, is digitized, right? I swear, in another generation, the leaders of the free world, they're all going to be librarians because those guys it's amazing what they can find. It's incredible. High school photos that I'm sure people didn't even know were still out there, old news articles. We were just looking at a case that maybe involves a serial killer, and for him to be able to go out there and find little tiny news articles that I couldn't find. I could not find them. And he's an academic librarian. So I found a lot of people at the university that are also really valuable to this work and also really enthusiastic about this work. So it's not all bad.
Where do you see the future of this program that you have going?
Well, I got my first dream answered just this month, finding out that the students are going to be paid for their work. The future needs to be that we need to have federal grants available so that other faculty don't end up in my situation, as it were. I'm doing all this work voluntarily. I have a full-time gig as a university professor, and it is time consuming and takes a lot of energy. I teach, I do research, and I do service work. This counts as service work, but it is a full-time job. No kidding. So I'm kind of doing 2 full-time jobs right now. And I think if the greatest thing that could happen for me would be for our federal agencies, Department of Justice, National Science Foundation, recognize the importance of this and allowed for faculty to buy themselves out of time so that they could dedicate themselves to getting a program like this up and running. That is the barrier for a lot of public universities in particular. They just don't have the resources. I've talked to 43 states so far since I've been doing this work. States that are somebody in that state's trying to set up a program like this. And that usually becomes the biggest barrier. So I hope that we change that and we have a way to buy out some of these university faculty who are trying to do this good work and trying to help law enforcement too. That would be ideal.
Ashlyn, you may be getting more phone calls. We have an international audience. We're very big
fabulous.
In Australia. So you may be getting some contacts from them because, again, there's like no downside to what you're doing. And,
no, there's not.
And, when I was in college, I did internships. I certainly went on some interviews with, what was my internship? Pennsylvania's Probation and Parole Office, and also with the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, 2 different internships. And, they were valuable. They were interesting. They let me sit in on some cases and some sit in on a trial or something and read some reports. But it wasn't like you're explaining, where the students, they're under control, I get it, and have rules and regs, but they have some autonomy too. They can go through a report, a series of reports from A to Z. And like I said, I think not only statewide, nationwide, but you may have some worldwide interest in this as this program becomes more well known. And they may name this program after you someday, and that would be... And you wouldn't want that, I know, but it's something that I think
we all have great projects that we're working on. This just seemed to hit America at just the right time, and I'm so thrilled it's getting all of this attention because I really think this can help law enforcement a lot.
Well deserved and well earned, I may say.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this work, and I really hope that we get to a point where we don't have all these cold cases. I think that would, I think also, the other thing that I like about this is I notice that a lot of the interest that I get from on this program, they're from women. I find that really interesting. Our Facebook page, the majority of the audience are female. Our Insta or the website traffic, it's really quite incredible. And I wonder if it has to do with, when I was in college, I remember going to the local police department saying, I want to be a cop. That's what I want to do. I was from Alaska. I felt perfectly comfortable around being around guns, and I grew up hunting with my family, and so I felt good being athletic and using guns. And they said, yeah, we don't really hire a lot of women. I mean, I just kept getting dissuaded. And now, half of the students are female and want to go to recruit school. I love that. I love hearing that. Maybe it's because the director is female, or maybe it's because the world's changing a little bit and our expectations. And I do think that law enforcement would benefit from a slightly different voice than what we've always heard. It can't hurt, right? And I don't push the students to do anything. I have no opinion on what they do. I just think it's really groovy that, more women want to do this in their life. I think that's cool.
I'm sure they realize, though, and I remember when I was going through college with a criminal justice degree very early on in the 70s, or when these degrees first started. But even my dad would say to me back then, and other people, well, you're going to have a college degree in this stuff. If you join a police department, can you go right to the detective division? I said, that would be nice, but you always start out in uniform patrol. And which is interesting. All the true crime interests we have today, and you mentioned many women are very interested in true crime. But we also have people, they seem to like the detectives, but not the uniform officers. And we discussed this, I think, in our last podcast a little bit, because, of course, they're out there right in the middle. The video cameras show everything, which I'm a supporter of that, because more than anything, it exonerates officers from doing bad things when accusations come in. But it's interesting that how some people, but there's also agendas involved in this, which we can save for some other podcast. But so bottom line is, I'm glad to hear, women, men of all different sizes and stripes and predilections. Let's get them on board, as long as they're serious about wanting to provide public service. To their communities.
They do meet regularly with my students. Meet regularly with a recruiter from the state police who lets them know, you can't go directly into the detectives bureau. There's a lot that goes into your training and other things. That what's been really cool for the last couple of years, the state police have invited the students to attend detective homicide school.
Wow.
It's the training that all detective homicide detectives in the state of Michigan go through, and they've allowed the students to go through that, which is super cool because it allows them to do classroom work plus do the scenario day where they put different scenarios out there, so the students are actually seeing the physicality of the work that law enforcement does. I think that's an important part of the students seeing, this is the real deal. This isn't like you're going to sit in a library, Carol, for the rest of your life.
And what we also have to impart to, the folks out there and younger folks, when you join law enforcement, you don't have to carry a gun and a badge. And that's one aspect of it. Almost every agency now that has more than 50 people in it has some kind of an analyst or archivist or something like that who is helping the investigators solve these cases. So they don't have to be out there kicking in doors and, wrestling drunks in their early days, at a bar fight or something, which I've done my share of that. But it also teaches you about life doing those things. But they could also move, just like the FBI. We have about 15,000 special agents. I keep saying we. I'm no longer an FBI agent, so it's a they. But they, 15,000 agents, but they also have, I don't know what the number is, 5,000, 10,000 analysts. And that's a whole separate, professional program within the FBI. And I know almost every state police agency, public safety agency has folks in that regard. And again, what the students are going through at Western Michigan University, it's a great training ground for them to get involved in those types of, to eventually get those types of jobs. And they can start in one level, one area, and go to the other. And they're still in the system for pension purposes and all that stuff. Not that they're thinking about money or retirement when they're 22 or 23, but it is good to know.
Ray and I did spend a lot of time this summer talking about that he and I are both offering a course that will bring in speakers from different elements of the state police. So it's not only a lecture-based course, but also, people that know a lot about DNA testing or the forensic field analysts, and then the recruiters that are talking about what it is to be a trooper or, to go break up those bar fights. I think it's really important for the students to recognize what law enforcement actually looks like. It's multifaceted, right? The cybercrimes, I'm going to have somebody from cybercrimes come and talk to my students next semester. I think that's a really important part of law enforcement in a way that it wasn't, 30 years ago. But it's important that they kind of understand that, they grasp it in a big way. I think it helps the students to figure out not only what they want to do, but what kind of training they should get themselves before they go into something like that. It's helpful if they can know, hey, I want to do DNA testing, so I need to go get a biology degree, or I want to work for the coroner's office. So, I'm going to go get an MD. And my students are so smart. They can just decide stuff like that. It's crazy.
That's perfect.
They make me feel like a slacker sometimes. I'm like, wow, you're 20. Holy cow. That wasn't me at 20. I wasn't that much of a high achiever.
Well, Ashlyn, is there anything that you want to share as we kind of wrap this session up of Cold Red?
I think if I could share something, it would be for anybody in law enforcement who is considering getting involved with a university like this. I think that the concerns about safety are really fixable. This is not a safety breach potential. I think there's too much writing on this for the students. The students want to do the right thing. Give these programs a chance. There's some states that are just afraid, and I don't think you need to be. I don't. It hasn't happened here that we've had a security breach. So let's get these going in every state.
I agree, and just so our audience knows, Ashlyn and I have been talking this, and I need to thank you for being a resource for me and helping me get this off the ground at Wilmington University. But I already have two major county police departments that have huge, very large numbers in cold cases that have agreed to already work with our students. And we're going to start out small, as you recommended, and then build on it as it goes from there.
Right.
I know Ashlyn started out with like 4 students, and now you're up to 15.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I have 16 right now. Mm-hmm.
16, which is great in reference to that because it gives you the opportunity to look at more cases. But, for us, I think it's important to start out small until we get our feet wet.
Go small first because there's a lot of moving parts here and you want to make sure you do it right. So it's easier if you just start one case, 4 students. That's the better way to get going.
I have you in my Fab 5 and on speed dial. So when things go wrong, I'll be calling you.
Am I one of those, Ray?
Jim, I have you too. Don't worry. You're in my Fab 5 and you're on speed dial. I got you, bud. I got you.
Well, I'd like to say one more thing before we go, though, too. If anybody is interested in this, there's a website. And, of course, we've got a Facebook account and whatnot. I do have a lot of materials that I share with other states and other schools. It's material on how to set up an encrypted computer system and everything from organizing files to the naming of files, all of that syllabi that we've kind of shared like a consortium. The website is WMICH/cold case. So WMICH.edu/cold case. Forgot the edu the first time. Sorry. But get in touch. if anybody has any questions that I can help you with.
I'm going to sign us out here. Again, Professor Ashlyn Kuersten, thank you so much for, number one, appearing on Cold Red, but number two, everything you've been doing within the state of Michigan, quite frankly. And there's a number of victims out there or their families that are very much appreciative already. And I have no doubt more to come, and more nationwide, I have no doubt, as this program expands. So
I hope so.
So thanks again for coming on board, Ray. Thanks again for your input here, and everyone out there. Check out the Cold Red podcast website. Subscribe. Look at all our social media sites, and we'll see you next time with another exciting guest. See you, Ray.
Thank you.
See you, Ashlyn. Bye.
Thanks, Ash.